There are moments in history that do not announce themselves. They do not arrive with sirens, or headlines, or urgency. They arrive quietly. So quietly, in fact, that many people do not notice them at first. They slip into ordinary evenings, into routine nights, into moments that feel familiar and safe. And only later, much later, do we realize that something unusual has passed through our lives. Not with force, not with fear, but with presence. This documentary was created for rest. There will be no sudden sounds, no sharp changes in volume, no dramatic music meant to startle or alarm. You are not required to stay awake. You are not required to pay close attention. You may listen casually. You may drift. You may fall asleep. The story will continue either way. At night, when the world grows quieter, the mind begins to wander. Thoughts slow down. Breathing becomes more regular, and the space between one thought and the next grows wider. It is in this space that curiosity often lives. Not the loud curiosity of daytime, but the gentle kind, the kind that wonders, without demanding answers, the kind that looks upward, without expectation. For as long as humans have existed, we have looked toward the sky, long before aircraft, long before satellites, long before the language of science gave names to stars and planets. The sky was there before us, and it will remain long after us. Silent, vast, unreachable. It has watched over early humans sitting beside fire, over farmers measuring seasons by stars, over travelers navigating by distant lights, across cultures, across centuries, across civilizations that never met. The same quiet habit appears again and again. People look up, and sometimes they notice something they cannot explain. This is not a story about belief. It is not an attempt to convince you of anything. It is not a declaration of truth, nor a denial of skepticism. This is a documentary built from reports, from what people said, they saw, from what was written down, from what was officially explained, and from what was left unresolved. Some details are clear, some details are not, and that uncertainty is not a flaw. It is the foundation. Because when something is truly unexplained, it does not arrive neatly packaged. It arrives fragmented, in pieces, in memories that do not always align perfectly. This documentary will move slowly through those pieces, not to force them together, but to let them exist as they are. If at any point you find your thoughts drifting, that is not a problem. If your breathing deepens, if your body relaxes, if sleep begins to arrive quietly, that is exactly how this experience is meant to unfold. You are safe here. There will be no sudden revelations, no shocking turns, no conclusions pushed upon you, only a gradual unfolding of a night that began like any other. The world we live in often feels loud. Information moves quickly. Opinions clash. Certainty is demanded. But the events explored in this documentary exist in a different rhythm. They exist in the space between statements, between explanations, between what is known and what remains unanswered. And it is in that space that many of the most enduring questions reside. At night, when the lights are dim and the distractions fade, the sky becomes something else. It becomes closer. Stars sharpen. Movement becomes more noticeable. Silence becomes more complete. In many places, especially away from cities, the sky does not feel distant. It feels present, as if it is watching as much as it is being watched. This feeling is not new. It is ancient, and it is shared by people who have never spoken to one another, who lived in different eras, who held different beliefs. Yet the sensation remains remarkably consistent. A quiet awareness that there is more above us, than we fully understand. In the United States, reports of unusual aerial phenomena have been recorded for generations. Not always publicly, not always seriously. Many were dismissed quickly. Some were never investigated at all. Others were cataloged, archived, and quietly set aside. Most of these reports did not mention anything extraordinary. They did not speak of visitors, or intentions, or messages. They described something much simpler. Lights, objects, movements, things seen briefly, often at night, that did not behave as expected. Most were eventually explained. Aircraft, atmospheric effects, misidentifications, and yet, a small number resisted classification. They did not fit comfortably into known categories. They remained unidentified, not because of mystery, but because of insufficient information. And among those rare cases, there are a few nights that continue to be discussed decades later, not because of what they proved, but because of what they did not. Before we arrive at that night, it is important to slow down, to understand the environment in which such events occur, not just the physical environment, but the human one, because unusual experiences do not happen in isolation. They happen to people living ordinary lives. Parents, neighbors, children, workers finishing long days. They happen during dinners, after sunsets, between conversations. They happen when no one is prepared. Imagine an ordinary evening. The sky begins to darken gradually. The temperature cools. Streetlights flicker on. Inside homes, televisions glow softly. Dishes are washed. Conversations fade. Outside, cars pass occasionally. Dogs bark in the distance. The air grows still. Nothing about the moment suggests that it will be remembered. And yet, history is full of moments just like this. Moments that felt unremarkable until they were no longer ordinary. This documentary is about one such evening. But before we reach it, we will move slowly. We will take time to understand the setting, the people, the atmosphere. We will examine what was reported, what was recorded, what was officially stated, and we will also acknowledge what remains uncertain. There will be no attempt to resolve every question. Some questions are not meant to be resolved quickly. Some linger. Some return only when the world grows quiet again. If you are still awake, you may notice your body becoming heavier, muscles relaxing, thoughts spacing out. If you are drifting toward sleep, that is fine. You do not need to hold on to every word. The rhythm matters more than the details. The sky has always been a mirror for human imagination. We project questions onto it, fears, hopes, but sometimes the sky reflects something back. Not an answer, just a reminder that our understanding has limits, and that those limits do not diminish us. They simply define the edge of what we currently know. As we move forward, this story will remain grounded. It will not ask you to believe. It will ask only that you listen, gently, casually, without expectation. And if sleep takes you, before the night we are describing fully unfolds, that is perfectly all right. Because like many of the events discussed here, this story does not demand attention. It waits. In the next section, we will begin to narrow our focus. We will move from the broad silence of the sky to a specific place, a place where open horizons meet quiet neighborhoods, a place where the night sky feels especially close, and where one ordinary evening slowly became something people would talk about for years to come. For now, allow yourself to rest. Let the silence settle, and let the story continue at its own unhurried pace. Long before questions had names, before science gave structure to curiosity, Before history was written down, humans looked upward. They did not always know what they were seeing, but they noticed the movement of lights, the slow turning of the stars, the predictable paths of the sun and moon, and sometimes something unexpected. This habit of looking up is older than language. It existed before belief systems, before borders, before technology. It is one of the few behaviors shared by every culture that has ever existed. In ancient times, the sky was not separate from daily life. It guided planting seasons. It signaled time. It offered direction. Stars were not distant objects. They were markers, companions, witnesses. People slept beneath open skies. They woke to light, not alarms. And because of this closeness, the sky was observed carefully. Changes were noticed. Patterns were remembered. Anything that did not fit those patterns stood out immediately. Across the world, stories emerged. Not stories meant to entertain, but records meant to remember. Descriptions of strange lights, objects that moved differently, phenomena that appeared briefly and then vanished. Most of these accounts did not attempt explanation. They simply stated what was seen, and then life continued. In many early cultures, the sky was considered a place of meaning, not necessarily a place of visitors, but a place of significance, something above human reach, something powerful, something not entirely understood. When something unusual appeared there, it carried weight, not fear, but attention. As societies evolved, so did interpretation. Religion offered symbols. Mythology offered narratives. But the core experience remained the same. Someone noticed something that did not fit expectation. They told others. Some listened. Some dismissed it. But the story existed nonetheless. As centuries passed, humans gained new tools. Telescopes, mathematics, physics. The sky became measurable. Distances could be calculated. Objects could be named. And with this new understanding came a shift. The unknown became something to solve, rather than something to sit with. But even as knowledge expanded, mystery did not disappear. It only changed shape. Modern humans no longer sleep beneath open skies as often. Cities glow. Buildings rise. Artificial light fills the night. The stars grow dimmer. And yet, the habit remains. People still pause, still look upward, still wonder, especially in moments of quiet, especially at night. There is something about the night sky that encourages reflection. The scale is difficult to ignore. The vastness resists simplification. It reminds us, gently, that we are small, not insignificant, just small. And in that smallness, curiosity finds room to breathe. Science has offered many answers. We know now that stars are suns, that planets orbit them, that galaxies stretch beyond imagination. We understand orbits, radiation, light years, but understanding does not erase wonder. In many ways, it deepens it, because each answer reveals how much remains unanswered. For most of modern history, the question, "Are we alone?" has been treated cautiously. It is a question that invites speculation. And speculation, in scientific circles, is handled carefully. Yet the question persists, not because of fantasy, but because of probability. The universe is large, incredibly large, and the conditions that allow life on Earth are not entirely unique. Water, energy, time. These ingredients exist elsewhere. That knowledge alone keeps the question alive. But the question of life elsewhere is different from another question, a quieter one. Have we ever noticed something unusual, closer to home? Something not far away in distant galaxies, but here, in our skies. This question does not require belief, only observation. Throughout the 20th century, reports of strange aerial phenomena increased. Not suddenly, gradually, as more people had access to flight, as more eyes were in the sky. Pilots noticed things. Radar operators noticed things. Civilians noticed things. Most of these reports had ordinary explanations. Aircraft, weather, optical illusions. But a small percentage did not. They resisted easy classification. They remained unidentified. The word unidentified is often misunderstood. It does not mean extraterrestrial. It does not mean impossible. It simply means that available information was insufficient. Nothing more, nothing less. And yet, those cases tend to linger because the human mind is not comfortable with gaps. We prefer resolution. But the sky does not always offer resolution. It offers moments. Brief ones. Fleeting ones. Lights that appear and disappear. Movements that defy expectation. Patterns that do not repeat. And when those moments occur, people remember them. Not vividly. Not always accurately. But persistently. Psychologists have long noted that humans are pattern-seeking. We search for meaning, for structure. When something does not fit, we notice it more. This is not a flaw. It is a survival mechanism. It helped our ancestors notice danger, opportunity, change. The sky, being vast and mostly consistent, becomes the perfect place for anomalies to stand out. Even today, with all our technology, the sky remains partly beyond control. Weather changes unexpectedly. Satellites malfunction. Signals distort. And sometimes, something appears that no one can immediately explain. When that happens, people do what they have always done. They look. They remember. They talk. Many who report unusual sightings do not seek attention. They hesitate. They doubt themselves. They ask others quietly, "Did you see that too?" And when someone else confirms it, even partially, the experience becomes harder to dismiss. It is important to understand this human element, because extraordinary claims do not usually begin as claims at all. They begin as confusion, as uncertainty, as moments that feel incomplete. Only later do they acquire language. Only later are they debated. The night sky encourages humility. It does not bend to human expectation. It does not adjust itself to fit our understanding. It simply exists. And in doing so, it invites questions. Some people are comfortable leaving those questions unanswered. Others are not. Some feel reassurance in mystery. Others feel discomfort. Neither response is wrong. They are simply different ways of relating to the unknown. When people share stories of unexplained sights in the sky, they are often sharing more than just what they saw. They are sharing how it felt to encounter something unexpected. That feeling is rarely fear. More often, it is quiet astonishment, a momentary sense that the world is larger than previously assumed. This is why such stories persist, not because they prove anything, but because they resonate. They echo a shared human experience, the experience of realizing, briefly, that our understanding is incomplete. In modern times, this realization often occurs in isolation. A person stands outside, looks up, sees something unusual, and then the moment passes. Life resumes, but the memory remains, sometimes faint, sometimes sharp. As this documentary continues, we will explore one such memory, one that was shared by many people on the same night. But before we arrive there, it is important to recognize why such moments matter. They matter not because they demand belief. They matter because They remind us of perspective. The sky is not a backdrop. It is an environment, one we live beneath constantly, yet rarely engage with deeply. And when something within it breaks pattern, even briefly, it captures attention. In quiet moments, especially before sleep, the mind often returns to unanswered questions, not aggressively, not urgently, but gently, as if turning them over. One last time, before rest. The question of what exists beyond Earth is one such question. It does not need an answer tonight. It simply needs space. As you listen, you may notice your breathing slow. Your thoughts may drift. You do not need to hold on to every idea. Let them pass, like clouds moving across the sky. In the next section, we will move closer to the ground. We will begin to talk about reports, not beliefs, not theories, but records. Times when people looked up and wrote down what they saw, calmly, without certainty, and without expectation that their experience would one day be revisited. For now, allow yourself to remain in this wider view, the long human habit of looking upward, of wondering quietly, of noticing, and then of resting. Before there were headlines, before television debates, before documentaries and online forums, there were reports, quiet ones, handwritten notes, brief statements, official forms filled out carefully and without emotion. Long before the phrase flying saucer entered public language, people were already describing things they could not explain. They did not call them extraordinary. They simply called them unidentified. The term UFO has never meant what many people assume it means. It does not stand for proof. It does not imply visitors. It does not require belief. It is a placeholder, a label used when something observed cannot be identified with the information available at the time. Nothing more, and nothing less. In the early 20th century, reports of unusual aerial phenomena were rare, not because they did not occur, but because the sky itself was less crowded. There were no commercial jets, no satellites, no drones. Anything in the sky was immediately noticeable, and when something unusual appeared, it was remembered. As aviation developed, so did documentation. Pilots began filing reports. Air traffic controllers took notes. Military personnel recorded anomalies, not with excitement, with caution, because in aviation, unknowns matter. They represent potential risk. During World War II, a strange phenomenon was reported by pilots. On both sides of the conflict, small glowing objects that followed aircraft at high altitude. They moved quickly. They did not show up on radar. They did not behave like known weapons. Pilots called them Foo Fighters. No explanation was ever officially confirmed. After the war, the reports quietly faded, but the memory remained. In the years that followed, as radar technology improved, something unexpected happened. Operators began noticing returns that did not match aircraft profiles. Blips that appeared suddenly, moved erratically, and vanished without trace. Most were dismissed as technical glitches. Some were investigated. A few remained unresolved. In 1947, the United States experienced a sharp increase in reports of strange objects in the sky. Newspapers picked up the story. The phrase flying saucer entered public awareness. For the first time, these reports were discussed openly, not because they were new, but because they were now shared. Government agencies responded cautiously. The concern was not extraterrestrial life. It was national security. Anything unidentified in the sky represented a potential threat. Foreign technology, experimental aircraft, surveillance platforms. These possibilities demanded attention. To address this, The United States Air Force initiated formal investigations. Projects were established to collect and analyze reports, not to prove anything extraordinary, but to reduce uncertainty. One of these initiatives became widely known as Project Blue Book. Its task was simple in principle: gather reports, analyze data, offer explanations when possible, and close cases when enough information existed. Over several years, thousands of reports were reviewed. The majority were explained. Stars misidentified as aircraft, weather balloons mistaken for objects, atmospheric phenomena misunderstood. This was expected. Human perception is imperfect, especially under low-light conditions. But not every case was resolved. A small percentage resisted explanation. Even after investigation, even after review by experts, these cases were labeled unknown, not because they were mysterious, but because data was insufficient. It is important to understand how rare these unresolved cases were. They represented a fraction of all reports, but their existence mattered because they demonstrated something simple: that even with investigation, some observations remain incomplete. The public reaction to these findings was mixed. Some felt reassured. Most sightings had explanations. Others focused on the unknowns. Why were some cases unresolved? What information was missing? Over time, interest in these reports faded from mainstream attention. The Cold War shifted focus. New concerns emerged. Space exploration captured imagination. The sky became associated with rockets and satellites. Mystery gave way to achievement. But reports never stopped. They simply returned to quieter channels. Filed internally. Discussed among professionals. Archived. Pilots continued to report anomalies. Radar operators continued to notice irregularities. Air traffic controllers continued to log unusual movements. These individuals were trained observers. Their reports were not speculative. They were factual. They described speed, altitude, direction, behavior, and when something did not match known profiles, it was recorded as such. In many cases, follow-up investigations offered explanations. In others, the trail ended quietly. No press releases, no announcements, just an unresolved entry in a database. As decades passed, technology advanced. Satellites multiplied. Tracking improved. Identification became easier. The expectation was that unknowns would decrease. And in many ways, they did. But they never disappeared entirely. The reason is simple. The sky is complex. Signals interfere. Objects overlap. Conditions change rapidly. Even the most advanced systems operate within limits. And when those limits are reached, uncertainty remains. For most people, this uncertainty goes unnoticed. Reports are filed. Cases are closed. Life continues. But for those directly involved, the memory lingers. Not dramatically, but quietly. Many witnesses describe a similar feeling. Not fear, not excitement, but a sense of incompleteness. Something observed, without resolution. Psychologists note that humans remember unresolved experiences differently. They stand out. They return during quiet moments. They resist being filed away neatly. This is why reports of unidentified aerial phenomena do not fade completely. They persist, not as proof, but as reminders. That observation does not always lead to understanding. In the late 20th century, interest in these phenomena began to re-emerge, not because of new evidence, but because of reflection. Documents were revisited. Archives were opened. Old reports were re-examined. Some of these records revealed patterns, Similar descriptions across decades. Similar movements. Similar behaviors. Still no conclusions. But consistency. It is tempting to interpret patterns. Humans naturally do. But responsible investigation resists that urge. It acknowledges similarity, without asserting cause. This restraint is important, because once interpretation replaces observation, objectivity fades. The reports lose value. The strength of these early records lies not in what they suggest, but in how they were recorded. Calmly, professionally, without speculation. They form a foundation, a historical context, a reminder that reports of unexplained aerial phenomena did not begin with one event. They existed long before, and they will likely continue long after. As this documentary progresses, we will move from this broad history toward a specific night, a night that did not stand alone, but stood out because of scale, because of consistency, because of how many people shared the same experience. Before arriving there, it is important to carry this context with us, to remember that what happened did not emerge from nowhere. It followed a long history of observation, of documentation, of quiet uncertainty. As you listen, you may feel your thoughts slow. This is natural. The repetition is intentional. The pace is unhurried. You do not need to retain every detail. The purpose is not memory. It is atmosphere. The sky, after all, has always been more about presence than explanation. And when something appears within it, that does not fit expectation. It does not demand answers immediately. It simply exists. Briefly, in the next section, we will narrow our focus further. We will turn our attention to a specific place, a place known for open skies, for wide horizons, and for a kind of silence that makes unusual sights impossible to ignore. For now, allow this history to settle. Let it become background, like stars behind clouds. Present, but not demanding. Every story exists somewhere, not just in time, but in space. And when it comes to events that involve the sky, the place matters more than we often realize. Because not all skies are the same. Some skies are crowded, filled with constant motion, aircraft, lights, noise. In such places, anything unusual is easily lost. But there are other places where the horizon stretches wide, where the air feels open, where silence is not rare. And in those places, the sky becomes impossible to ignore. The American Southwest is one of those regions, a vast landscape, shaped by heat, wind, and time. Deserts that appear empty at first glance, but reveal subtle complexity when observed closely. Low vegetation, open land, clear air, and above it all, an expansive sky. In this part of the country, the atmosphere behaves differently. Humidity is low. Visibility is high. On clear nights, stars appear sharp and steady. There is less distortion, less haze. Movement in the sky is easier to detect. Even small changes stand out. This is one reason why the Southwest has long been associated with observation, astronomy, aviation testing, military training. The conditions are ideal, and because of that, people who live here are accustomed to looking up. The rhythm of life in such places is shaped by the environment. Days are bright and dry. Evenings cool quickly. As the sun sets, the heat releases slowly from the ground. The air becomes still. Sounds travel farther. A car passing miles away can be heard clearly. Night arrives gently here, not suddenly. The sky darkens in layers. Blue fades into deep violet. Violet gives way to black. And as artificial lights flicker on, the contrast becomes noticeable. Street lights glow softly. Porch lights mark quiet homes. Beyond them, darkness dominates. In many neighborhoods, people spend time outside in the evening, sitting on steps, standing in driveways, talking quietly. Children play until the light fades. Adults linger, enjoying the cooling air. The sky remains visible, unobstructed by tall buildings. This familiarity with the night sky creates a subtle awareness. People notice when something changes. They notice when a star appears brighter than usual. They notice when a light moves differently. They notice silence. Silence is an important detail. In open landscapes, sound behaves differently. Aircraft can be heard long before they are seen. Helicopters announce themselves clearly. Jets leave unmistakable trails of noise. When something moves silently, it is immediately unusual. This is not a region where the sky is ignored. It is part of daily life, a constant presence. And because of that, anything that disrupts expectation does not go unnoticed. Geography also shapes perspective. Flat land allows wide views. Hills and mountains frame the horizon rather than block it. Distances are easier to judge. Movement across the sky can be followed for long periods. There are fewer visual obstructions. This matters because many reports of unusual aerial phenomena are dismissed due to limited perspective. Tall buildings, urban clutter, restricted sightlines. But in open terrain, observation lasts longer. Details accumulate. Patterns become clearer. Weather also plays a role. In desert regions, cloud cover is often minimal. Storms are dramatic, but relatively rare. Most nights are clear. The sky reveals itself fully. This consistency builds confidence. People know what normal looks like. When something deviates from that normal, it stands out sharply, not as a brief flash, but as an extended experience. Minutes rather than seconds, sometimes longer. The human element is also shaped by place. Communities in such regions tend to be close-knit. Neighbors know one another. People talk. When something unusual is seen, word spreads quickly. Questions are asked. Confirmation is sought. Did you see that? This simple question carries weight, because when it is asked, it is rarely the first time. It is asked after someone has already watched, already doubted themselves, already tried to rationalize. When another person confirms it, even partially, the experience changes. It becomes shared, and shared experiences are harder to dismiss. The location we are discussing sits within this broader environment, a place where aviation is common, but predictable, where military activity exists, but follows known patterns, where people are familiar with aircraft and their behavior. This familiarity is important, because when witnesses describe something unusual, they are not doing so from ignorance. They are doing so from comparison. They know what they normally see. They know what they normally hear. And when something does not match, they notice. The land itself is quiet, not empty, but quiet. Wildlife moves subtly. Wind brushes across open ground. At night, the absence of constant noise creates a kind of awareness. Small sounds become noticeable. Movement draws attention. Light behaves differently in darkness. A single bright source can dominate the sky. Its movement becomes easier to track. Its behavior easier to compare. Against stars, aircraft, and satellites, people living in such regions develop an intuitive understanding of the night sky. They know when a satellite will appear. They know how planes approach airports. They know the rhythm of blinking lights. When something does not fit that rhythm, It feels wrong. Not frightening. Just wrong. This is why location matters. Because perception is shaped by experience, and experience is shaped by environment. It is also why many significant sightings are reported from similar regions. Open land, clear skies, low light pollution, places where the sky is not hidden. The location at the center of this documentary shares all of these characteristics. It is not remote wilderness. It is not a bustling metropolis. It exists in between, a place where ordinary life unfolds, beneath an extraordinary sky. On most nights, nothing unusual happens. People go to bed. Lights turn off. The sky remains quiet. But every so often, something changes. Not dramatically, subtly. A light appears where it shouldn't. Movement occurs without sound. Time stretches. When that happens, the environment amplifies the experience. The openness allows observation. The silence allows focus. The familiarity allows comparison. This is why we begin here. Not with the event itself, but with the place. Because without understanding the setting, the experience loses context. As you listen, you may find yourself imagining this environment. The cooling air, the wide horizon, the darkening sky. You do not need to picture it precisely. The feeling is enough. In the next section, we will move closer. From geography to daily life. We will talk about an ordinary day, an ordinary evening, one that did not feel special at first, and how slowly it became something people remembered. For now, allow the setting to settle in your mind. The open land, the quiet streets, the vast sky above. Let it become familiar, because soon, something within it will begin to change. Most significant moments do not begin with warning. They begin like any other day, quietly, predictably, without distinction. And this day was no different. Morning arrived as it always did. Light filtered in gradually, soft and pale, touching rooftops and quiet streets. There was no urgency in the air, no sense of anticipation, just routine. People woke to familiar sounds. Alarm clocks, coffee brewing, the low hum of traffic beginning to move. Some prepared for work. Others stayed home. Children dressed for school. Backpacks were slung over shoulders. Conversations were brief, focused on plans for later in the day. Nothing felt unusual. The sky overhead was clear. Not striking. Not dramatic. Just blue. A kind of blue that goes unnoticed because it appears so often. As the morning passed, the day unfolded in fragments. Errands were run. Phones rang. Messages were exchanged. Time moved forward in its usual, unremarkable way. In neighborhoods, people came and went. Cars pulled out of driveways. Garage doors opened and closed. Mail was delivered. The small mechanics of daily life continued uninterrupted. At schools, lessons were taught. At offices, meetings were held. At home, chores were completed. Nothing about the day stood out enough to be remembered later. By early afternoon, the warmth had settled in. The sun sat high. Shadows shortened. The heat was familiar, expected for the season. People adjusted without thinking. Windows were closed. Air conditioners hummed softly. Water was poured. Time passed. As the day moved toward evening, the pace began to slow. Workdays ended. School let out. Children returned home. Conversations shifted from tasks to plans, from responsibilities to rest. Some people prepared dinner. Others stepped outside briefly, checking the weather, enjoying the change in temperature. The sky remained calm, unchanging. It offered no suggestion that anything out of the ordinary would occur. As the sun began its descent, the light softened. Colors warmed. The edges of buildings glowed gently. This transition from day to evening is one of the most familiar experiences. It happens daily. So often, it barely registers. Dinner tables filled. Televisions flickered on. Voices overlapped. Laughter rose briefly, then faded. Outside, the world quieted. Traffic thinned. Footsteps slowed. The heat released slowly from the ground. Windows were opened. Cool air moved in. Sounds traveled farther. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A distant car passed. This was the moment many people would later recall, not because it felt important then, but because it marked the boundary, the last ordinary moment, before something changed. But at the time, it felt like nothing at all. Just another evening. People settled into routines. Some washed dishes. Some made phone calls. Some stepped outside again, drawn by the cooling air. The sky continued its gradual transformation. Blue gave way to deeper tones. Stars began to appear, faint at first, one by one. This is a familiar sight. So familiar that it often escapes notice. But familiarity breeds awareness. People who live beneath open skies recognize the patterns. They know where stars appear. They know how planes cross the sky. They know the difference between steady light and blinking motion. On this evening, those patterns were intact. Everything appeared normal. Children played until darkness made it difficult. Parents called them inside. Doors closed. Lights turned on. The neighborhood settled. Some people prepared for sleep. Others planned to stay up. The night was young. The temperature continued to drop. The air felt still. The kind of stillness that invites lingering. In many homes, people paused near windows, not intentionally watching the sky, just existing near it. This is often how observation begins, not with searching, but with presence. The human mind is relaxed in these moments. Guard down. Expectations minimal. When something unusual appears in this state, it feels different than if it appeared during focused attention. It feels intrusive, not alarming, but noticeable. As evening deepened, the stars grew brighter, more visible. The sky felt open. Somewhere in the distance, an aircraft passed. Its lights blinked rhythmically. Its sound followed moments later. Everything behaved as expected. This is important, because when something later deviated from this behavior, the contrast was clear. At this point in the evening, no one was recording. No one was preparing documentation. No one suspected that this night would be discussed for years. Phones were used casually, not to film the sky, to send messages, to check schedules. Televisions continued playing. Radio stations aired music. Life continued. There was no sense of anticipation, no tension, just comfort. This ordinariness is essential to remember, because extraordinary experiences are often shaped by what they interrupt. The quieter the moment, the louder the disruption. As night settled fully, the sky reached a familiar state. Dark, clear, calm. People stepped outside again. Some to smoke, some to take out trash, some just to breathe. It was during these brief moments that attention began to shift. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Just another glance upward. Another casual look. Then, something subtle. Not dramatic. Not sudden. Just different. But that belongs to the next part of the story. For now, we remain here. In the ordinary. In the familiar. In the comfort of a day that gave no warning of what it would become. As you listen, you may feel yourself sinking deeper into rest. The repetition is deliberate. The pace is unhurried. There is no need to remember every detail. Only the feeling, the sense of normal life unfolding, without awareness of what lies ahead. Because when people later described this night, they always began the same way. They said it was just another day. In the next section, we will approach the moment when that statement stopped being true, when attention shifted, when someone noticed the first unusual detail. For now, let the ordinariness remain. Let it settle, because it is the contrast that gives the next moment its power. The first sign was not dramatic. There was no flash, no explosion, no sudden movement that demanded attention. It was quieter than that. It began as a feeling, a small hesitation, the kind that makes a person pause. Mid-step, mid-thought. Something was different, but not yet clear. Someone standing outside noticed a light, not because it was bright, but because it was steady. It did not blink. It did not pulse. It simply existed, where nothing usually appeared. At first, it was dismissed. A star, perhaps, or a distant aircraft, approaching from an unfamiliar angle. These thoughts came easily. They always do. The human mind prefers explanation, especially simple ones, especially familiar ones. The person looked away briefly, then looked back. The light was still there. This was the first moment of hesitation. Not concern, just awareness. The light did not move quickly. It did not dart. It did not draw attention to itself. It moved slowly, almost patiently. That slowness mattered, because aircraft do not behave this way. Stars do not behave this way either. Still, the difference was subtle, easy to overlook, easy to rationalize. Another person noticed it too, from a different location. They did not speak to one another. They did not know. They were sharing the same moment. They both did the same thing. They watched quietly. Time passed. Seconds. Then minutes. The light did not disappear. It did not fade. It did not blink out of existence, the way satellites sometimes do. This persistence was the second detail that felt unusual. Someone else stepped outside. They followed. The same pattern. A glance upward. A brief pause. A longer look. Do you see that? The question was asked softly. Not urgently. Not loudly. The other person looked. They saw it too. Now the moment had shifted. It was no longer private. It was shared. Shared experiences change perception. They anchor uncertainty. They make dismissal harder. The light remained steady. It maintained its brightness. It did not flicker, as atmospheric reflections often do. Someone pointed. Another person followed the gesture. More eyes moved upward. At this stage, no one used words like strange or unknown. The language was still cautious, tentative. Is that a plane? Is that a star? These questions were not rhetorical. They were genuine attempts to understand. The light began to move. Not fast, not slow, at a speed that felt intentional. It traveled across the sky, without the arc of a plane, without the gradual rise or descent. It moved level. That movement was the third detail. Aircraft adjust altitude. They bank. They turn gradually. This light did not. Someone waited for sound. None came. The absence of sound became noticeable. In open air, silence is rarely complete. A jet announces itself long before it arrives. A helicopter vibrates the air. This light did neither. The silence lingered. At this point, phones were reached for. Not immediately to record, to check the time, to confirm orientation. The light continued moving. Unhurried. Another light appeared, not far from the first. Similar brightness. Similar steadiness. Now attention sharpened. Two lights, moving together. Suggested pattern. Pattern invites comparison. People searched memory. Have they seen this before? Is this normal? Someone mentioned satellites. But satellites follow predictable paths. They do not change direction. These lights did. Slightly. Enough to notice. The movement was smooth. No jerks. No acceleration bursts. Someone stepped farther. Into the open. Another joined them. Voices remained calm. Measured. No one shouted. No one panicked. This calmness is important. Because panic distorts memory. Calm observation preserves it. The lights maintained formation. Spacing remained consistent. That spacing was the fourth detail. Aircraft formations are rare over residential areas. Military formations are louder. This was neither. The lights did not cast beams. They did not illuminate the ground. They did not blink in standard aviation patterns. Someone tried to film. The camera struggled. Low light reduced clarity. On screen, the lights appeared smaller. Less impressive, but they were still there. This disconnect between experience and recording would matter later. More people gathered. Not crowds. Small clusters. Neighbors spoke quietly. They pointed. They watched. Questions repeated. What is that? No one answered confidently. The lights slowed, then stopped. That pause was the fifth detail. Objects in the sky rarely stop. These did. They hovered, not swaying, not drifting, hovering without sound. The silence deepened. People waited. Then the lights moved again. This time, in a different direction. Not gradually, not in a curve. They shifted orientation smoothly. This movement felt wrong. Not frightening, but unfamiliar. The mind registered mismatch. Someone felt a chill. Not from fear, from realization. This was not behaving like anything they recognized. At this point, phones were raised more deliberately. Calls were made. Are you outside? You need to see this. Information spread. Others stepped out. Some missed the early moments. They saw the lights already in motion. For them, there was no build-up, just the sight. They asked questions, received partial answers. The sky felt active now. The lights continued. Their quiet movement. Still no sound. Someone mentioned calling authorities. Not as an accusation. As a question. Should someone report this? Another person already had. The moment crossed a threshold. It was no longer just observation. It was documentation. And yet, despite the strangeness, there was still calm. People stood. They watched. They waited. No one felt threatened. No one felt chased. The experience felt passive, as if the lights were indifferent to being seen. This indifference made it stranger. Most aircraft avoid attention. These did not. They simply moved. This was the first unusual detail. Not a single thing, but a sequence. A light, then persistence, then silence, then movement, then pause, then change. Each detail alone might have been dismissed. Together, they formed something else. As minutes passed, the sky no longer felt empty. Something was happening. In the next section, more people will notice. Reports will multiply. Descriptions will begin to match. For now, this is where uncertainty first took shape. Quietly, without announcement. As you listen, allow the image to remain soft. Not sharp, not alarming. This moment did not demand belief. It only demanded attention. And attention, once given, changes everything. At first, only a few people were watching. Small groups. Individuals standing alone. Each person experiencing the moment from their own perspective. But the sky does not belong to one observer. As the minutes passed, attention spread. Not quickly, naturally. A phone rang. Someone stepped outside again. Another person followed. Look up, someone said quietly. Not urgently, just a suggestion. And once the suggestion was made, eyes followed. From different streets. different yards, different angles. People looked up and saw the same thing. This was when the experience began to change. Individual uncertainty gave way to collective awareness. When one person sees something unusual, they doubt themselves. When many people see the same thing, doubt shifts. Descriptions began to overlap. Not perfectly, but closely enough. Lights, silent, moving together. Someone described them as forming a line. Another said they appeared connected. A third said they felt spaced deliberately. Different words, same observation. This consistency mattered. The lights moved slowly across the sky, not directly overhead, but visible from wide areas. People who had not seen the beginning joined partway through. They asked questions. How long has that been there? The answer varied. A few minutes. Longer. I don't know. Time felt distorted. When attention is focused, minutes stretch. More phones were raised. Not everyone recorded. Some simply watched. Recording felt secondary. The experience itself demanded presence. As more people gathered, voices remained low. There was no shouting, no chaos. This calm atmosphere would later surprise investigators. Mass sightings are often imagined as panicked crowds. This was not that. It felt more like a shared pause. People stood side by side, with neighbors they barely knew. Conversation was minimal, mostly observations. It's still there. It's not making any sound. Look, it's turning. Each comment reinforced the moment. The lights did not behave erratically. They behaved consistently. This consistency made them harder to dismiss. One light would slow. Another would match its pace. Spacing remained uniform. People tried to estimate size, distance, height, without reference points. Estimation was difficult. Some thought they were very high. Others thought they were closer. But all agreed on one thing. They were large enough to be noticed clearly, and quiet enough to feel unnatural. More calls were made. Friends, family members, you need to come outside. Some hesitated. Some did not. Within minutes, the number of observers increased. Not a crowd, but enough to create consensus. Consensus does not require agreement on every detail. It requires alignment on the core experience. Something was moving across the sky, silently, in formation. This alignment would later become important. As the lights progressed, they passed from one neighborhood's view into another's. People who had not been connected by proximity were now connected by observation. Separate groups, watching the same sky. Some observers lived miles apart, yet their descriptions matched closely. They spoke later, compared notes. The overlap was striking. This is often how large-scale sightings are recognized. Not in the moment, but afterward. At the time, each group believed they were witnessing something isolated. The idea that others were seeing the same thing did not immediately register. But as calls continued, that realization grew. This isn't just us. The sky felt larger now. Not empty, but active. The lights continued moving, sometimes slowing, sometimes pausing. Each pause drew attention. Objects in the sky rarely pause. People waited for sound. Again, nothing. Silence became a defining feature. Someone mentioned aircraft regulations. Navigation lights. These did not match. A few people tried to rationalize. It might be military, but military aircraft announced themselves differently. Even experimental aircraft produced sound. These did not. This mismatch between expectation and observation deepened. As time passed, the lights began to shift formation. Not abruptly, smoothly. They appeared to align. Some thought they formed a shape. Others hesitated to say so. Describing shapes invites interpretation. Still, the idea lingered. The lights did not scatter. They did not break apart. They behaved as if coordinated. Coordination implies control. This thought remained unspoken. For many, the experience felt observational, not confrontational. People did not feel watched. They felt included, as if the lights were indifferent to human presence. This indifference was unsettling in a quiet way. Most aircraft respond to attention. They avoid. They adjust. These did not. Phones buzzed with messages. Others are seeing this too. The realization spread. This was not a single sighting. It was a shared event. That realization brought a subtle shift. People began to remember details more carefully. They pointed out movements, tracked direction. Someone noted landmarks. It's moving past that ridge. Another confirmed. Details accumulated. Not dramatically, methodically. This methodical observation would later lend credibility. Eyewitness accounts are often dismissed due to inconsistency. Here, consistency was emerging naturally. Even those who remained skeptical acknowledged the oddity. I don't know what it is, someone said. Not disbelief, just honesty. As more time passed, some observers stepped away. Life continued. Children needed attention. Phones rang, but many remained. They felt compelled to watch, not out of fear, out of curiosity. Curiosity is quieter than fear. It does not rush. The lights continued their slow journey. People speculated gently. Could it be flares? Someone shook their head. Flares descend. They flicker. They fade. These did not. The lights maintained brightness. This constancy became another shared detail. As the event unfolded, the number of observers peaked. Not everyone at once, but enough to ensure the experience would not remain isolated. Later, when reports were compared, this section of the timeline stood out. The moment when one person noticing became many people witnessing. This transition is crucial. It transforms a sighting into an event. An event is not defined by what is seen. It is defined by how widely it is experienced. At this point, the sky had become the focus of an entire community. Quietly, without announcement. As you listen, you may notice a subtle shift in energy. Still calm, but fuller. This is intentional, because this is where memory deepens. Shared experiences imprint differently. They carry weight. In the next section, we will explore how the sky itself seemed to change, how movement became more pronounced, how attention sharpened further. For now, remain in this moment, the moment when observation spread, when uncertainty became collective. The lights continued, silent, steady, unconcerned, and more people stood beneath them than anyone realized at the time. There comes a moment, in certain experiences, when uncertainty shifts, not into fear, not into certainty, but into recognition, a quiet understanding that what is unfolding does not belong to the ordinary. For those watching the sky, that moment arrived gradually. The lights had already been present long enough to dismiss coincidence. Now, their movement began to change. They no longer drifted casually. They began to behave with intention. One light slowed. Another adjusted to match it. Spacing remained consistent. This was not random motion. It was coordinated. People noticed this immediately, not because they were searching for meaning, but because the pattern was obvious. The lights formed a broad shape, not sharply defined, but suggested. Some observers hesitated to describe it. Words felt inadequate. Others tried anyway. A curve, a line, like they're connected. Descriptions varied slightly, but the core remained. The lights were not independent. They moved as if part of a single structure. That realization carried weight. Aircraft do not behave this way. Satellites do not behave this way. The formation shifted again. Slowly, deliberately. The lights tilted, not individually. Together. This movement was one of the most reported details. A coordinated tilt. Across multiple points of light. The sky itself seemed to rotate. People followed the motion. Without speaking, silence returned. Not imposed. Shared. This silence was different from the silence earlier. Earlier, silence was simply the absence of sound. Now, it felt like attention. As the formation moved, it passed across familiar landmarks. Mountains, ridges, open space. This provided scale. Observers could compare size against known features. The formation appeared vast. Not distant pinpoints. Not close enough to touch, but large enough to occupy space. The lights did not flicker. They did not change color dramatically. They remained steady. This steadiness made them easier to track. People noticed that the lights did not cast beams downward. They did not illuminate the ground. This absence of interaction felt strange. Most aerial objects interact with their environment. These did not. They moved through the sky without disturbance. The movement speed remained consistent. Not fast, not slow. A speed that felt chosen. People attempted comparison. How fast is that? Without reference. Answers varied, but all agreed. It was faster than drifting objects, and slower than jets. This in-between speed made categorization difficult. Phones continued recording. Some recordings captured the lights. Others struggled. Cameras adjusted exposure. On screen, the formation appeared fragmented. The eye saw cohesion. The camera did not. This mismatch would later become important. Witnesses would say, it looked different in person. This is a common feature of low-light events. Human vision adapts dynamically. Cameras do not. As the formation continued, it seemed to respond to nothing. No sound from the ground. No change in weather. It did not react. This lack of reaction made the event feel passive, not confrontational. People did not feel targeted. They felt observed, or perhaps simply irrelevant. That feeling is difficult to describe. It is not fear. It is distance. The formation paused again, hovering. Each pause felt longer than the last. Time stretched. People lost track of how long they had been watching. Minutes blended. The lights remained. This persistence deepened the sense of anomaly. Most misidentified objects resolved quickly. This did not. Someone noted the absence of blinking patterns. No red-green navigation lights. No strobe. Nothing that matched aviation standards. This detail was mentioned repeatedly in later reports. As the formation resumed movement, it did so smoothly. No acceleration burst. No deceleration lag. Just motion, as if friction did not apply. Observers felt this instinctively. It was not physics they were evaluating. It was expectation. The formation did not behave like anything they knew. At this point, some observers felt awe. Not excitement. Not joy. A quiet awe. A recognition of something unfamiliar, moving through familiar space. Children watched. They asked questions. Adults did not answer definitively. They did not want to shape interpretation. They simply said, they didn't know. This honesty mattered. It kept the moment grounded. The formation continued. Some lights dimmed slightly. Others maintained brightness. The structure remained intact. People tried to follow it as it moved farther away. Eventually, The angle made tracking difficult. The formation became harder to see, not because it vanished, because distance increased. The lights did not blink out. They receded. This slow departure felt intentional, not abrupt, not evasive, just complete. As the formation moved out of view, people remained outside. They waited, not sure what they were waiting for. Another appearance, another movement. Some returned indoors briefly. They came back out again. The sky felt changed. Not physically, psychologically. It felt active now, as if something had passed through it. Even after the lights were gone, attention remained. People continued scanning. Every star was scrutinized. Every aircraft compared. Nothing else matched. This contrast reinforced memory. When something unusual ends, normalcy does not return immediately. There is an afterimage, a residue of attention. That residue would carry forward. In the next section, this attention will turn outward. Calls will be made. Authorities contacted. Radios activated. The private experience will intersect with public systems. For now, let this moment settle. The sky changed. Not dramatically, not violently, but unmistakably. As you listen, allow the image to soften. The lights moving together. The silence. The slow departure. This is not the climax. It is the middle. The moment when uncertainty deepened and memory began to anchor. When uncertainty becomes shared, it rarely stays private for long. Not because people panic, but because systems exist to receive questions. As the lights continued moving across the sky, some observers reached for their phones. Not to post, not to speculate, but to ask, is anyone else seeing this? At first, these calls were informal. Friends, family members. Step outside. You need to look up. But gradually, the questions changed. Do you know what that is? And when no one could answer, the next step felt natural. Authorities. This decision was not dramatic. It was practical. When something unusual appears in public space, people look for official guidance. Someone called a local police department. Another called emergency services. The tone of these calls was calm, measured. Callers described what they were seeing. Lights in the sky, silent, moving together. Operators listened. They asked clarifying questions. How many lights? What direction? How fast? These questions were routine. Emergency dispatch centers are designed to gather information, not interpret it. As more calls came in, a pattern emerged. Different callers, different locations, same descriptions. This consistency was noted. Dispatch logs filled. No immediate threat was reported. No emergencies declared. But curiosity increased. Radio traffic picked up. Officers asked one another if they had received similar calls. They had. This is how official awareness begins. Not with declarations, but with accumulation. A single call is easy to dismiss. Multiple similar calls are not. As reports continued, operators attempted to categorize the event. Aircraft, air traffic control was contacted. They checked flight paths. Nothing unusual was scheduled. Military activity? No exercises were reported in the area at that time. Weather phenomena? Conditions were clear. No storms. No atmospheric disturbances. Each possibility was considered. None fit cleanly. This did not trigger alarm. It triggered documentation. In procedural systems, uncertainty is recorded, not dramatized. Officers were instructed to observe if possible. Some stepped outside. They looked up. They saw the lights too. This confirmation mattered. It moved the reports from secondhand to direct observation. Radio conversations shifted tone, still calm, but focused. I can see them. The lights were described. Over open channels. Descriptions matched civilian reports. Silent. Moving together. No blinking. This alignment between civilian and official observation would later be noted. At this stage, no conclusions were drawn. None were needed. The role of first responders is not to explain the unknown. It is to record what is happening. And that is what they did. As the lights continued their movement, dispatch centers received updates. They're moving east. They've slowed. They're stopping again. Timestamps were recorded. Locations logged. This created a timeline, not a narrative, just data. Some callers asked if they should be concerned. Operators reassured them. There's no indication of danger. This reassurance was honest. Nothing about the event suggested threat. No erratic behavior. No approach toward the ground. Just presence. The lights remained distant. This distance contributed to the calm response. Had the lights descended, the reaction might have changed. They did not. As time passed, the number of calls peaked, then gradually declined. Not because interest faded, because the lights moved on. As the formation receded, dispatch centers received final updates. They're disappearing now. Operators noted the time. Some asked callers to remain available in case follow-up was needed. Others simply closed the call. The event was logged, not as a mystery, as an occurrence. This is often misunderstood later. People expect dramatic reactions, but official systems are designed for stability. They absorb uncertainty without amplifying it. The absence of an explanation does not imply secrecy. Often, it simply reflects incomplete information. As radios quieted, officers returned to routine. Dispatchers moved to other calls. The lights were gone, but the record remained. Logs, timestamps, notes. These records would later become reference points, not because they solved anything, but because they confirmed something important, that the event was not imagined. It was reported. It was observed. It was documented. This distinction matters. Stories fade. Records persist. In the days that followed, some of these records would be requested, reviewed, compared, but at the time, nothing more was required. The system had done its job. As observers returned indoors, the night regained its quiet. But something had changed. Not in the sky. In awareness. People replayed the event in their minds. They wondered what the calls had revealed, what officials might say, what explanation might come. These questions were not urgent. They could wait until morning. As you listen, you may feel the pace slow again. This is intentional, because this section marks a transition from experience to record, from observation to documentation. The next section will explore how information moves beyond the moment, how media begins to notice, how a quiet event enters public awareness. For now, allow this procedural calm to settle. The lights were seen, the calls were made, the radios spoke, and then the night continued. While many people on the ground were watching the sky with curiosity, there were others already in the air. People whose daily work involved reading the sky. Pilots are trained observers. They do not simply look at the sky. They interpret it. Altitude, speed, direction, relative motion. These details matter in flight. They are not optional. For pilots, anything unusual in the airspace demands attention, not fascination. Assessment. On this night, several pilots reported seeing lights that did not match known aircraft behavior. Some were flying commercial routes. Others were in private aircraft. They were separated by distance, different altitudes, different flight plans. Yet their descriptions shared similarities. Lights, silent, moving steadily. From the air, movement is easier to judge. Relative speed becomes clear. When compared to known reference points, stars remain fixed. Aircraft follow predictable paths. The lights did neither. Pilots noted that the objects did not appear on radar in ways they expected. This absence was not alarming. Radar contact can be inconsistent, but combined with visual observation, it added complexity. Some pilots initially assumed the lights belonged to other aircraft. They checked traffic advisories. Nothing matched. Air traffic control was contacted. Questions were asked. Is there traffic in this area? Controllers checked. They did not see corresponding targets. This exchange was brief, professional. No panic, just confirmation that something unusual was being observed. Pilots continued monitoring. They adjusted focus. They compared motion. The lights moved smoothly. No sudden acceleration. No erratic turns. But also no banking. No gradual climb or descent. This lack of aerodynamic behavior stood out. Aircraft rely on lift. They bank to turn. They adjust pitch. The lights did not. They shifted direction without visible transition. Pilots described this carefully, not dramatically. They avoided speculation. They focused on behavior. The movement was unusual. That phrase appeared more than once. Pilots are cautious with language. They understand how reports are interpreted. They do not exaggerate. They describe what they see. Some pilots noted, the lights appeared to be in formation, not loosely, deliberately. Spacing was maintained. Altitude appeared consistent. These observations were significant. Formation flying requires coordination. Even advanced aircraft maintain communication. These lights showed no signs of communication. No visible signals. No sound. From the air, sound travels differently. Engines are unmistakable. The absence of sound was noted. Some pilots expected to hear something later. A delayed roar. It never came. This reinforced the anomaly. Pilots continued their flights. They did not divert. There was no immediate hazard, but the observation remained. Later, some pilots documented the sighting. They filled out reports, not because they believed something extraordinary had occurred, but because procedure required it. Unidentified objects in controlled airspace are logged. These reports became part of the record. They were factual. Time, location, description, no interpretation. This neutrality would later be important. When civilian and pilot reports were compared, overlaps appeared. Descriptions aligned. Silent lights, steady movement, formation behavior. This convergence added weight, not proof, but consistency. Pilots also noted how long the lights remained visible, longer than typical transient phenomena. This duration allowed observation, not just a glance. Extended watching. From altitude, the scale felt different. The formation appeared large, not distant pinpoints, not nearby flares. Something occupying space, yet still difficult to judge. Distance precisely. This uncertainty is normal in flight. Even trained observers can misjudge scale at night. Pilots acknowledged this. They did not claim certainty. They reported observation. Some pilots later said, the sighting lingered in their minds. Not because it frightened them, but because it did not fit anything they had encountered before. Pilots encounter unusual visuals regularly. Weather effects, reflections, rare optical phenomena. They recognize these patterns. This felt different, not threatening, just unfamiliar. As flights continued, The lights eventually moved out of view. Pilots returned focus to routine, checklists, communications, navigation. But the memory remained. Later, when the event was discussed publicly, pilot accounts were referenced, not as definitive answers, but as corroboration. Trained observers had seen something too. This mattered to many people, because pilots are not prone to imagination. Their training emphasizes precision. Their reports carry weight, not because they are extraordinary, but because they are careful. As you listen, you may feel the atmosphere shift slightly, still calm, but grounded. This section anchors the experience. Within professional observation, it reminds us that the sky is not only watched by civilians. It is monitored constantly, and when something unusual appears, it is noticed from multiple perspectives. In the next section, attention will move beyond witnesses. Media will begin to ask questions. The quiet event will start to enter public awareness. For now, let this aerial perspective settle. The sky was watched, from below and above, and in both cases, the same conclusion emerged. Something was seen. It did not match expectation, and it passed without explanation. Not every unusual event becomes a story. Most fade quietly. They are experienced, discussed briefly, and then replaced by the next day's concerns. But occasionally, something lingers. In the hours following the sightings, people talked, not loudly, casually, at work, at school, in small conversations. Did you hear about the lights? The question spread, the same way the observation had. Slowly, at first, the information was fragmented. Someone had seen lights. Someone else had heard police radios. Another mentioned pilots. Individually, these details meant little. Together, they formed a shape. Local journalists began to receive calls. Not tips. Questions. Do you know what that was last night? Reporters are trained to recognize patterns. One call is anecdotal. Several similar calls suggest a story. Still, caution guided the response. Newsrooms do not rush to publish uncertainty. They verify. They check official sources. Police departments were contacted. Air traffic control was asked. The answers were consistent. There was no immediate explanation. This absence of explanation was not unusual. Many events take time to clarify, but the volume of reports set this night apart. Different neighborhoods, different observers, same descriptions. This consistency caught attention. Initial coverage was minimal. Short segments, brief mentions. Several residents reported seeing lights in the sky. No speculation, no dramatic language, just acknowledgement. This early restraint is often overlooked later. People remember the headlines. They forget the tone. At this stage, the tone was calm. The story was framed as an unusual local occurrence. Not a mystery, not a revelation, just something unexplained. As coverage continued, more witnesses came forward. Some called news stations directly. Others responded to open requests. What did you see? Descriptions aligned. Lights moving together. Silent. Slow. Reporters took notes. They did not editorialize. They compiled. Visuals were scarce. Footage existed, but clarity was limited. Low light. Shaky cameras. Editors debated use. The images did not explain. They only suggested. This ambiguity influenced coverage. Without clear visuals, stories remained cautious. Language mattered. Unidentified lights. Not craft. Not objects. Lights. This choice reflected uncertainty. Journalists avoided asserting meaning. They reported what was known and what was not. As days passed, Regional outlets picked up the story. Still measured. Still cautious. National media did not immediately engage. The event lacked drama. No damage. No injuries. No threat. This absence of impact kept the story contained. But it did not disappear. Online discussions began. Not viral. Gradual. People shared experiences. Compared notes. Asked questions. Forums filled with speculation. But mainstream coverage remained grounded. This balance mattered. It prevented the story from spiraling. It also frustrated some viewers. People wanted answers. Media did not have them. This tension between curiosity and restraint is common. Journalism thrives on clarity. This event offered none. As official statements were awaited, news outlets prepared follow-ups. They contacted military spokespeople, aviation authorities, meteorologists. Each offered possibilities. None definitive. These responses were included. Without endorsement. This approach maintained neutrality. Some outlets invited experts, aviation analysts, astronomers. They spoke cautiously. They discussed what the lights were not. They avoided stating what they were. This distinction is important. Ruling out explanations is not the same as providing one. As coverage continued, headlines remained understated. No dramatic fonts. No urgent language. Just curiosity. Unexplained lights reported by residents. The story entered public awareness. Not as a spectacle, but as a question. This framing shaped perception. People who had seen the lights felt validated. They were not alone. Their experience was acknowledged, but not exaggerated. Those who had not seen them were intrigued, but not alarmed. This balance allowed discussion, without polarization. Over time, the media cycle moved on. Other stories emerged. Attention shifted, but the event did not vanish. It settled. It became part of local memory, occasionally referenced, rarely revisited. This quiet persistence is characteristic of events without resolution. They do not end. They pause. As you listen, notice how the pace remains gentle. This is intentional. The media response did not accelerate the story. It stabilized it. The next section will explore the first official explanation, offered not as a conclusion, but as an attempt. For now, let this phase settle. The moment when observation became a story, when silence entered print, and when questions found a wider audience. When an unusual event enters public awareness, there is an expectation that answers will follow. Not speculation, not opinion, but explanation. Official explanations rarely arrive immediately. They take time. Information must be collected, reports compared, possibilities reviewed. This process is not dramatic. It is methodical. In the days following the sightings, questions continued to reach official offices, police departments, aviation authorities, military representatives. Each was asked a version of the same thing. What was seen that night? At first, the response was simple. We are reviewing reports. This statement is often misunderstood. It does not imply secrecy. It implies procedure. Organizations responsible for airspace do not speculate publicly. They gather information first. As reports were reviewed, a working explanation began to form. Not a final answer. A provisional one. The explanation referenced a known activity, military training exercises. Specifically, the use of aerial illumination devices designed to simulate battlefield conditions. These devices are commonly known as flares. Flares are used for many purposes: training, illumination, testing visibility. They burn brightly. They can appear stationary. They can drift slowly. Under certain conditions, they can look unusual. This explanation was offered carefully. It was not declared as absolute fact. It was presented as the most likely cause. Based on available information, military representatives noted that training exercises were conducted in the region. The timing aligned roughly. The location was consistent. On paper, the explanation fit. For many people, this was sufficient. Flares are real. They are documented. They are used regularly. They explain lights in the sky. But for others, questions remained. Not out of defiance. Out of detail. Witnesses compared their experience with what they knew of flares. Some had seen flares before. They remembered descent, fading, smoke. Their memories did not align perfectly with what they had observed. This discrepancy became the center of discussion, not accusation. Comparison. The official explanation addressed the phenomenon broadly. It did not address every specific detail reported by witnesses. This is not unusual. Official statements are general by design. They provide context, not narrative. They aim to reduce uncertainty, not eliminate it entirely. For many observers, this created a quiet tension. The explanation explained something, but not everything. And when an explanation does not fully align with lived experience, questions persist. Some witnesses accepted the explanation without hesitation. Others felt unsure. Neither response was extreme. Both were reasonable. Human perception is imperfect. Memory is influenced by context. It is possible to misinterpret visual phenomena. It is also possible for explanations to be incomplete. Both truths can exist simultaneously. The official explanation was repeated by media outlets, often summarized. Military flares likely responsible. The word likely mattered. It acknowledged probability, not certainty. Over time, this explanation became the default reference. It appeared in follow-up articles, in summaries, in discussions years later. But alongside it, witness accounts remained. Descriptions of movement, silence, formation. These details did not disappear. They were simply set beside the explanation. This coexistence defined the event's legacy, not resolved, but framed. Some experts weighed in. They discussed how flares behave under specific atmospheric conditions, temperature gradients, wind patterns, perspective. They noted that under rare conditions, flares can appear to hover. They can seem to move laterally. They can look different, depending on angle. These explanations added nuance. They did not dismiss witnesses. They contextualized. For some, this was reassuring. For others, it still felt incomplete. The official explanation did what it was meant to do. It provided a plausible cause. It reduced speculation. It allowed institutions to move forward. But it did not close the story, because stories involving human observation rarely close cleanly. They settle. They become part of memory. As time passed, discussion slowed. Media moved on. Official attention shifted elsewhere. But the question lingered quietly, not loudly, not insistently, just present. In moments of reflection, people revisited the night. They replayed details, compared memory with explanation. This comparison did not lead to consensus. It led to coexistence. Two narratives, the official one and the personal one, both valid within their own boundaries. This balance is common in unexplained events. Official explanations address systems, personal experiences, address perception. They do not always align perfectly. And that misalignment is not necessarily a failure. It is a reflection of complexity. As you listen, you may feel the pace slow further. This is intentional. This section is about resolution, without closure, about answers that do not silence questions. In the next section, we will explore why some people remained unconvinced, not in opposition, but in careful disagreement. For now, allow this explanation to settle, not as truth, not as fiction, but as an attempt to understand something that did not announce itself. The lights appeared, reports were filed, an explanation was offered, and still, the night remained. Disagreement does not always arrive loudly. It does not always argue. It does not always confront. Sometimes, it simply remains. After the official explanation was shared, many people accepted it. They moved on. Life continued. But for others, something lingered. Not anger, not defiance, just uncertainty. These individuals did not reject the explanation outright. They examined it. Quietly, they compared it to what they remembered. Memory is not perfect. They knew this. But certain details felt anchored, not easily dismissed. One of the most frequently mentioned details was duration. Flares burn for a limited time. They descend. They fade. Many witnesses recalled the lights, remaining visible, far longer than expected. Not seconds, not a few minutes, extended periods. This difference mattered. Another detail was movement. Witnesses described lateral motion, not drifting downward, side to side, controlled. They compared this to prior experiences. Some had seen military flares before. They remembered descent. They remembered flicker. What they saw this night felt different. Silence was another factor. Flares burn hot. They hiss. They crackle faintly. Many witnesses described complete silence. Not reduced sound. None at all. This absence stood out. Some people dismissed this detail. Distance can mute sound. Others felt it still mattered. Formation was also discussed. Flares are often deployed in clusters. But clusters disperse. Spacing changes. Witnesses recalled consistent spacing. Lights that moved together, maintained alignment. This consistency felt intentional. Another point of divergence was altitude. Flares are typically deployed at known heights. Some witnesses felt the lights appeared higher. Others thought they were lower. Perspective at night is difficult. This was acknowledged. Still, the range of estimates did not fully align with flare behavior. These discrepancies did not prove anything, but they created friction, not dramatic friction, subtle, enough to prevent full acceptance. Some witnesses attempted to reconcile both views. Perhaps some lights were flares. Perhaps others were something else. This hybrid explanation was uncomfortable. Systems prefer singular causes. Human experience often resists them. Another factor was emotional memory. People remembered how the moment felt. Calm, not alarming, but focused. The sky felt organized, not chaotic. This feeling is difficult to quantify, but it matters. Emotional impressions shape interpretation, even when logic intervenes. Skeptics pointed out that memory can be influenced. Discussion afterward can reshape recollection. This is true. Human memory is malleable, but some witnesses noted they had not discussed the event with others beforehand. Their impressions formed independently. Later comparison revealed overlap. This independence strengthened confidence. Still, others argued that expectation could influence perception. Once an explanation is offered, people reinterpret memories. This too is true. The disagreement existed not between belief and disbelief, but between interpretations of experience. This nuance is often lost. Public discourse prefers extremes, but most disagreement lived in the middle. I don't know. This phrase appeared often, not as surrender, as honesty. Some people felt the explanation answered enough. Others felt it answered too generally. Both positions were reasonable. Another element influencing disagreement was trust. Trust in institutions. Trust in communication. Some witnesses felt the explanation arrived too quickly. Others felt it arrived too slowly. Timing matters. Perception of transparency matters. Neither side accused deception. They questioned completeness. Completeness is subjective. Institutions communicate in summaries. Experiences occur in detail. This mismatch creates space for disagreement. Years later, people would still discuss the event, not to argue, to compare, to ask, "What do you think it was?" Answers varied. Some said flares. Some said unknown. Most said they weren't sure. This uncertainty became part of the story, not as a failure, as a characteristic. Events without clear resolution do not demand alignment. They allow plurality. As you listen, notice the softness of this section. There is no push, no verdict, just an exploration of why answers do not always settle. The next section will examine evidence. What was recorded, what was not, and why visual proof often fails to capture experience. For now, allow this disagreement to rest, not as conflict, as reflection. The official explanation existed. So did lived experience. Between them, a quiet space remained. When something unusual is witnessed, the next question often follows automatically. Is there proof? In modern life, proof is often expected to be visual. A photograph, a video, a clear recording, something concrete, something repeatable. On the night of the sightings, some people attempted to capture what they were seeing. Phones were raised. Cameras were adjusted. Record buttons were pressed. The intention was simple, to preserve the moment. But intention does not guarantee result. Low-light environments are difficult to record, especially with consumer devices. Human eyes adapt dynamically. Cameras do not. When the lights appeared in the sky, they stood out clearly to observers. Against darkness, the contrast felt strong. But when translated to a screen, that clarity diminished. Sensors struggled. Exposure fluctuated. Autofocus searched what the eye perceived as cohesive. The camera recorded as fragmented. This gap between perception and recording is common. It is not deception. It is limitation. Many recordings captured small points of light, without scale, without context, without depth. To someone who had not witnessed the event, the footage looked unimpressive. Blurry lights, shaking frames, dark backgrounds, nothing definitive. This contrast frustrated some witnesses. They knew what they had seen. They knew the footage did not convey it. This mismatch would later shape debate. Some critics dismissed the recordings outright. Just lights. Others pointed out that video alone cannot represent experience. Both positions were understandable. Still images faced similar challenges. Long exposure blurred motion. Short exposure dimmed detail. The lights lost structure. They became abstract, without reference points. Their movement was difficult to judge. Size could not be determined. Distance remained unknown. Photos answered little. They confirmed presence. Nothing more. Audio recordings were also considered. Most captured silence. This absence of sound matched witness accounts. But silence alone does not explain cause. Radar data was discussed. Some expected radar confirmation, but radar coverage varies. Not all objects reflect radar equally. Not all radars monitor all altitudes continuously. The absence of clear radar returns was noted, but not definitive. It neither confirmed nor denied anything. Physical evidence on the ground was minimal. No debris, no residue, no environmental impact. This absence reinforced the non-intrusive nature of the event. Nothing landed, nothing touched down, nothing interacted physically with the environment. This lack of physical trace made investigation difficult. Without material evidence, analysis relied on testimony. Testimony is often undervalued, but it remains a core component of historical documentation. Eyewitness accounts shape understanding when physical evidence is unavailable. Still, testimony is subjective. Memory shifts. Details blur. This is acknowledged. Yet when many testimonies align, patterns emerge. In this case, they did. But pattern is not proof. It is context. Some investigators attempted to reconstruct the event visually. They mapped witness locations. They plotted sidelines. They overlaid movement paths. These reconstructions suggested a large-scale phenomenon. But reconstruction relies on input. Input relies on memory. And memory has limits. The visual evidence did not settle the debate. It never does. Images rarely close questions. They often open new ones. What was not captured becomes as important as what was. Why no clear footage? Why no close-up? The answers were simple. Distance, technology, timing. The event did not announce itself. People did not prepare. They reacted. Reaction rarely produces ideal documentation. Some people argued that the lack of clear evidence suggested nothing extraordinary occurred. Others argued that extraordinary events often leave little trace. This debate repeated, not heated, persistent. The physical evidence remained limited, not because it was hidden, but because the event itself was distant and transient. This limitation did not invalidate the experience. It contextualized it. Human history is full of moments, recorded imperfectly. Earthquakes before seismographs, storms before satellites, astronomical events before telescopes. Lack of documentation did not erase their occurrence. It simply delayed understanding. As you listen, notice how this section slows again. This is intentional. Evidence analysis is not dramatic. It is careful. It respects uncertainty. In the next section, we will explore the role of memory and psychology, how humans remember unusual events, and why memory can feel vivid, even when evidence is limited. For now, allow the idea of imperfect recording to settle. Not everything that happens leaves a clear trace. Some moments exist, mostly in memory, and memory, while imperfect, is still real. When people recall an unusual experience, they often say the same thing. I remember it clearly. Clarity, however, does not always mean precision. The human mind is not a camera. It does not record events frame by frame. It interprets. Perception begins before awareness. Light enters the eye. Signals travel. The brain fills gaps. This process happens instantly, automatically. Most of the time, it works beautifully, but in unfamiliar situations, the brain must work harder. It searches for reference. What am I seeing? Have I seen this before? When the answer is no, the brain slows. Attention increases. Details feel sharper. Time feels stretched. This heightened awareness often leads people to believe they are remembering perfectly, But heightened awareness does not equal perfect recall. It means the event mattered. Memory is not stored as a continuous recording. It is stored as fragments, visual impressions, emotional tones, key moments. Later, the brain reconstructs the event. This reconstruction feels seamless, but it is influenced by many factors. What we thought during the event, what we heard afterward, what explanations were offered. None of this implies dishonesty. It implies humanity. Psychologists have studied this extensively. When people experience something unexpected, their memory becomes vivid, but not always exact. Colors may feel brighter. Movement may feel smoother. Duration may feel longer. These distortions are subtle. They are not errors. They are interpretations. In the case of the lights, many witnesses remembered how calm the experience felt. Calmness shapes memory. Fear compresses time. Calm expands it. When calm observers watch something for several minutes, it can feel like much longer. This may explain why duration estimates varied. Some remembered minutes. Others remembered far longer. Both impressions were real. They reflected perception, not clocks. Another factor is shared memory. When people discuss an event together, details align, not because they are invented, but because the brain prefers coherence. If one person says, "They moved together," another may recall that detail more clearly. This is called memory reinforcement. It strengthens certain aspects. It does not create the event. It emphasizes parts of it. This process is natural. It happens with family stories, with historical events, with collective experiences. The lights became a shared reference point. People compared memories. Over time, descriptions became more consistent. This consistency does not mean fabrication. It means alignment. The brain seeks pattern, especially after uncertainty. Another important element is expectation. If someone expects nothing unusual, they may dismiss odd details. If someone expects explanation, they scrutinize. On that night, most people did not expect anything. This lack of expectation made the event stand out. Later explanations introduced new frameworks, flares, aircraft, optical illusions. These frameworks influenced memory. Some people adjusted recollection. Others resisted. Neither response was conscious. The brain adapts automatically. Perception is also influenced by environment. Nighttime reduces depth cues. Dark skies remove reference points. Movement appears different. Objects seem closer or farther than they are. This does not invalidate observation. It contextualizes it. The mind fills in distance. It estimates size, often inaccurately. This is why eyewitness estimates vary widely. Not because people lie, because estimation without reference is difficult. Emotional imprint is another factor. Events that feel meaningful leave deeper marks. People remembered where they were standing, who they were with, what they felt. These details became anchors. Anchors make memories feel solid, even if peripheral details shift. This is why witnesses remain confident, even while acknowledging uncertainty. I know what I saw. This statement reflects experience, not explanation. Understanding psychology does not mean dismissing experience. It means respecting complexity. The mind is both precise and interpretive. It records impact, not raw data. In events like this, impact matters. People felt something unusual occurred. That feeling persisted, even when explanations were offered. This persistence does not indicate belief. It indicates unresolved perception. The brain prefers closure. When closure is incomplete, memory remains active. The event stays alive. It resurfaces in conversation, in reflection. Years later, people still remembered, not the footage, not the reports, but the feeling of looking up and seeing something unfamiliar move silently across the sky. As you listen, notice how this section does not argue. It explains. Human memory is not flawed. It is adaptive. It allows us to navigate a complex world, but it also reminds us that certainty is rare. The next section will explore how time changes perception, how years later, events like this are remembered differently. For now, allow this understanding to settle. What people saw mattered. How they remember it matters too. Both can be true. At the same time, time has a way of changing how events are understood. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually. In the days following the sightings, details were fresh. Memories were close to the surface. People spoke cautiously. They corrected themselves. I might be mistaken. That's how I remember it. This uncertainty felt honest. But as weeks turned into months, the language shifted. Descriptions became smoother. Narratives more complete. This is not distortion. It is organization. The human mind organizes experience. Over time, it selects what mattered. It trims what did not. This process creates coherence. And coherence feels like truth. Distance also changes perspective. When an event is close, it feels personal. When it is distant, it becomes conceptual. People no longer ask, "What did I see?" They ask, "What does it mean?" Meaning replaces detail. This shift happened slowly. At first, the event was discussed as a local occurrence. Then, it became a reference. Remember that night? Later, it became a comparison. This reminds me of that. With time, the event entered a larger category. Not as an answer, as an example. Retrospective analysis began. People revisited old notes, old recordings, old articles. They compared them with newer information, new aerial phenomena reports, new disclosures, new discussions, each new context, reshaped interpretation. This does not mean the past changed. It means the frame changed. Frames influence meaning. An unexplained light in the sky feels different. Before and after, similar reports appear elsewhere. What once felt isolated now feels connected. Connection can be misleading. It can also be illuminating. Retrospective analysis walks this line. Some people noticed how their own memory had changed. Details felt clearer. Others felt more uncertain. I used to be sure about that part. This awareness is important. It shows reflection, not certainty. As time passed, the emotional intensity faded. Fear, curiosity, excitement, all softened. What remained was a quiet sense of anomaly. Something unusual had happened. Exactly what remained unclear. This ambiguity became the lasting feature. Time did not solve the mystery. It normalized it. Normalization is powerful. It allows events to exist without resolution. In history, many phenomena are recorded this way, not explained, just noted. Time also filters voices. Those who spoke early are remembered. Those who stayed quiet fade. This selection shapes narrative, not intentionally, naturally. The loudest accounts become reference points. Quieter ones are lost. This does not mean the loudest are most accurate. They are simply most available. This availability bias is well documented. It influences retrospective analysis. People rely on what they can access. Old articles, archived footage. Memory becomes secondary. The record becomes primary. But records are incomplete. They reflect what was captured, not everything that occurred. This gap between record and experience widens with time. It creates space for interpretation. Some fill that space with skepticism, others with curiosity. Most remain somewhere in between. Time also introduces comparison. Later events are compared to earlier ones. Similarities are emphasized, differences minimized. This creates patterns. Patterns feel meaningful, but pattern recognition does not equal explanation. It is a cognitive function. It helps us navigate complexity. It can also mislead. Retrospective analysis requires humility. It must acknowledge what is known and what is not. In this case, what remained known was simple. People saw lights. They moved unusually. They were silent. Everything beyond that was interpretation. Time did not erase the event. It reframed it. The event became less about the sky and more about human response. How people observe, how they remember, how they explain. This shift is subtle, but important, because it reveals something deeper, not about what was seen, but about how meaning is constructed. As you listen, you may feel the pace slow further. This is intentional. Reflection requires stillness. The next section will explore how similar events appear across history, not to connect them, but to compare how humans respond to the unknown. For now, allow this distance to settle. The event is no longer immediate. It is part of memory, and memory, with time, becomes perspective. Long before cameras, long before radar, long before controlled airspace, people looked up at the sky and noticed things they could not explain. History is filled with moments like this, not always dramatic, often brief, sometimes recorded, sometimes not. Ancient civilizations left behind drawings, shapes in the sky, lights above the horizon, objects moving among stars. These records are ambiguous. They were not scientific. They were observational. People described what they saw using the language they had. Gods, spirits, omens, not because they believed blindly, because explanation follows culture. In medieval Europe, there are accounts of celestial shields, large, luminous shapes, seen during daylight. Chroniclers wrote cautiously. They did not claim understanding. They documented wonder. In the 1500s, townspeople in Nuremberg reported shapes battling in the sky. Circles, rods, spheres. Modern readers often reinterpret these accounts, but interpretation is retrospective. At the time, these were simply recorded observations. In the 1800s, with the rise of newspapers, reports increased. Airships were seen. Long before powered flight was common, witnesses described structured objects, lights, movement. Some explanations emerged. Hoaxes, experimental craft. Others remained unresolved. In each era, technology shaped explanation. What people could imagine defined what felt plausible. In the early 20th century, as aviation advanced, sightings shifted. People reported aircraft-like shapes, flying discs. Language evolved. So did expectation. After World War II, the sky became crowded. Jets, satellites, radar. Reports did not stop. They changed. Lights moving too fast. Objects stopping suddenly. The unknown adapted to the known. Or rather, human interpretation did. This pattern repeats. Each generation frames the unexplained through its own lens. This does not imply continuity of a single phenomenon. It implies continuity of human curiosity. People have always looked up. They have always noticed anomalies. And they have always tried to understand. the night of the lights, fit into this long pattern, not as proof of anything ancient, but as another moment, where observation exceeded explanation. Historical parallels do not solve mysteries. They contextualize them. They remind us that uncertainty is not new. It is recurring. The same questions echo across centuries. What was that? Did others see it? Will we ever know? Sometimes answers emerge. Often, they do not. What remains is the record, a description, a drawing, a report, each one imperfect, each one human. The value of these records is not in their precision. It is in their persistence. They show that the unexplained is part of the human experience, not an exception, a constant. As time moves forward, technology improves. Recording becomes easier. Analysis becomes more sophisticated. But interpretation remains. No matter how advanced tools become, there are limits. Perception, context, assumption. These limits persist. The event described in this documentary is one among many, not unique, not isolated, but connected. Through the shared act of noticing, people looked up. They saw something unfamiliar. They tried to understand. History shows this cycle repeating, not as a failure, as a feature. As you listen, let this long view settle. Imagine centuries of observers, different languages, different beliefs, same sky, same curiosity. The lights change. The questions remain. In the next section, we will examine how modern science approaches uncertainty, not with answers, but with frameworks. For now, rest in the continuity. The unknown has always been with us, and so has the desire to understand it. Science does not begin with answers. It begins with questions. This is often misunderstood. Many people believe science exists to explain everything. In reality, science exists to test explanations. When something unusual occurs, science does not rush to name it. It slows down. It observes. It collects data. Only then does it attempt understanding. In events like the lights in the sky, science asks a simple question first. What do we actually know? Not what we think. Not what we feel. What can be measured? This distinction is critical. Measurements include time, location, movement, consistency. In this case, some of these were available. Others were not. Science is comfortable with incomplete data. It does not panic. It waits. One of the first scientific steps is elimination. What is it not? Not a known aircraft. Not a scheduled satellite. Not a weather event. Each elimination narrows the field. But narrowing does not equal solving. Sometimes, what remains is simply unidentified. This word causes discomfort. People want resolution. Science accepts uncertainty. Unidentified does not mean extraterrestrial. It means not yet explained. This is an important difference. In recent years, scientific institutions have become more open about this. Unidentified aerial phenomena. The term itself is neutral. It avoids assumption. It describes status, not origin. Science also relies on repeatability. If an event cannot be reproduced, it is difficult to study. Rare events pose challenges. They appear briefly, then disappear, leaving limited traces. This does not invalidate them. It limits analysis. In such cases, science turns to statistics. How often do these events occur? Are there patterns? Clusters? Trends over time? Patterns suggest structure. Structure invites hypothesis. But hypothesis requires testing. Testing requires data. And data is often sparse. This is where patience matters. Science does not declare failure. When answers are missing, It records. It archives. It waits for comparison. Over time, similar reports may emerge from different locations, different observers. If similarities persist, interest increases. Frameworks develop, not conclusions. Frameworks. A framework allows questions to be asked consistently. It standardizes observation. It improves future data collection. In this way, even unresolved events contribute to scientific progress. They refine tools. They adjust methodology. They improve awareness. Science also acknowledges bias. Observer bias. Instrument bias. Interpretation bias. These are not weaknesses. They are accounted for. Peer review exists for this reason. Multiple perspectives reduce error. But peer review requires material. In cases like this, material is limited, so conclusions remain tentative. This tentativeness frustrates some. It reassures others. Science does not seek comfort. It seeks accuracy. Accuracy sometimes means saying we don't know. This phrase is not an ending. It is an invitation. An invitation to observe better, to measure more precisely, to remain curious. Events like the lights challenge assumptions. They remind us that not everything fits neatly, that our understanding is partial. Science embraces this humility. It does not claim omniscience. It evolves. Over time, what was once unexplained may become understood, or it may remain unresolved. Both outcomes are acceptable. What matters is integrity. Science does not fill gaps with certainty. It leaves them open. This openness is often mistaken for weakness. In truth, it is strength. As you listen, notice how this section does not attempt to persuade. It explains a mindset, a way of approaching the unknown, without fear, without belief, without dismissal. In the next section, we will explore how institutions balance public communication with uncertainty, why silence is sometimes chosen, why statements are cautious. For now, let this scientific calm settle. The unknown does not threaten science. It sustains it. Every unanswered question keeps inquiry alive. And sometimes, that is enough. NSE. When something unusual happens, people often expect a clear response, a statement, an explanation, a conclusion. But institutions do not respond the way individuals do. They move carefully, not because they hide information, but because they manage responsibility. Every public statement carries weight. Words can reassure. They can also escalate. This balance shapes institutional behavior. After the sightings, many noticed something subtle. The absence of urgency. There were no press conferences, no emergency announcements, no alerts. This silence felt meaningful to some. To others, it felt ordinary. Silence is common when there is no immediate threat. Institutions prioritize risk. Was anyone harmed? No. Was infrastructure affected? No. Was airspace compromised? No confirmed evidence. Without these factors, response remains minimal. This does not mean nothing happened. It means nothing demanded action. Institutions also communicate through internal channels first. Reports are circulated. Data is reviewed. Options are considered. Public communication comes later, if at all. Another factor is jurisdiction. Who is responsible? Local authorities? Federal agencies? Military? When responsibility is unclear, communication slows. Statements require coordination. Coordination takes time. And sometimes, the conclusion is simple. There is nothing new to say. In this case, a general explanation was offered. After that, silence returned. This silence did not signal secrecy. It signaled closure. From an institutional perspective, the matter was resolved, even if not everyone agreed. Institutions do not revisit issues without new information. Repetition without data does not change assessment. Public curiosity alone does not drive response. This difference between public interest and institutional priority often causes tension. People want acknowledgement. Institutions want stability. Neither position is wrong. They serve different purposes. Silence also prevents speculation. If officials comment repeatedly, without new facts, they risk amplifying uncertainty. Restraint can be intentional. It keeps the narrative grounded. It avoids unintended escalation. Historically, many unexplained events receive minimal comment, not because they are dismissed, but because they do not require action. Action is driven by impact, not mystery. This can feel unsatisfying. Humans seek meaning. Institutions manage consequence. These goals do not always align. Another element is precedent. What happens if every unexplained sighting receives detailed response? Expectations change. Resources shift. Institutions must consider scale. If an event does not repeat, attention fades. Silence follows. This pattern is common. Over time, the absence of commentary becomes part of the story. People read into it. Silence is interpreted, but silence is not language. It is absence. Meaning is assigned externally. This assignment varies. Some interpret silence as dismissal, others as uncertainty, others as quiet acknowledgement. The institution itself rarely clarifies, because clarification would reopen discussion, and discussion without data serves little purpose. This does not mean institutions are uninterested. They monitor. They archive. They wait. If similar events occur again, patterns emerge. Then response changes. This conditional engagement is deliberate. It balances openness with responsibility. As you listen, notice how this section remains steady. No accusation. No defense. Just observation. Institutions are not minds. They are systems. They operate differently from individuals. Understanding this difference reduces frustration. It also reframes silence, not as secrecy, but as procedural restraint. In the next section, we will explore how individuals carry these experiences forward, how silence affects memory, how unanswered questions linger. For now, let the stillness remain. Statements were made, then stopped, and the night returned to quiet. Years passed, quietly, without announcement. Life moved forward. Jobs changed. Families grew. Addresses shifted. For many who witnessed the lights, the night did not dominate their lives. It did not define them, but it stayed, not always present, sometimes dormant, waiting. Years later, when asked about that night, many paused, not because they had forgotten, but because remembering required context. It was not a story they told often. It did not fit easily into conversation. How do you explain something you still don't understand? This question lingered. Some witnesses described the memory as surprisingly intact. They remembered where they stood, the temperature, who was beside them. These anchors remained clear. Other details had softened. Exact timing, exact direction. These faded. This is normal. Memory preserves meaning, not measurement. When witnesses spoke years later, their tone was calm, not excited, not defensive. They did not seek validation. They simply described, "I don't know what it was." This sentence appeared often, not as a disclaimer, as a conclusion. Some witnesses said they had stopped trying to explain it. They had accepted uncertainty. Others admitted they still thought about it, especially when similar stories surfaced. A headline, a documentary, a discussion. These moments reopen memory, not to change it, to revisit it. Some said, the experience changed. How they looked at the sky, not dramatically, just slightly. They noticed movement more. They paused longer. Curiosity lingered, but not fear. Fear had never been part of it. That detail remained consistent. The memory did not carry threat. It carried wonder. This distinction mattered. People rarely revisit frightening memories willingly, but they return to curious ones. Wonder invites reflection. Years later, witnesses often emphasized how ordinary the night had been, how unexpected the experience felt. This contrast remained vivid. The ordinariness of before, the strangeness of during, the quiet of after. Some witnesses mentioned they had told their children, not as a warning, as a story. Something unusual happened once. No conclusions attached, just observation. Others kept it private. They felt no need to share. The memory was theirs. Personal. It did not require belief, only acknowledgement. When witnesses compared memories years later, they noticed differences, not contradictions. Emphasis. One remembered movement. Another remembered stillness. Both were true. Perspective shapes memory. This diversity did not weaken the story. It humanized it. Not everyone remembers the same thing, for the same reasons. But the core remained. Lights. Silence. Unfamiliar movement. That core endured. Years also brought new context. Scientific discussions evolved. Public conversations changed. The term unidentified became less taboo. This shift allowed witnesses to speak more comfortably, without fear of ridicule, without pressure to conclude. They could say, I don't know, without apology. That freedom mattered. Some witnesses expressed gratitude that the experience was shared. They had not been alone. This collective memory reduced doubt, not by proving anything, by confirming experience. Years later, no one claimed new answers, no hidden revelations, no sudden clarity, just reflection. As you listen, notice how this section feels softer. This is intentional. Time smooths edges. Intensity fades. What remains is meaning. The experience became less about what was seen and more about how it felt to witness something beyond immediate explanation. In the next section, we will explore how such experiences shape belief systems, not toward certainty, but toward openness. For now, let this long memory rest. Years passed. The lights did not return, but the memory remained. Quiet, unresolved, and still meaningful. Belief is often misunderstood. So is skepticism. They are frequently presented as opposites. One emotional, the other rational. But in reality, they are closely related. Both arise from the same place. Uncertainty. When people encounter something they cannot immediately explain, they respond differently. Some search for meaning. Others search for mechanism. Neither response is wrong. They simply reflect temperament. For many witnesses, the experience did not create belief. It created openness. They did not suddenly accept new ideas. They questioned old ones. This distinction matters. Belief implies conclusion. Openness implies possibility. Many witnesses described becoming more comfortable with not knowing. This comfort was subtle, not philosophical, practical. I don't need an answer for everything. This mindset reduced tension. It allowed the memory to exist without demand. Skepticism also played a role. Some witnesses became more skeptical, not of the event, of explanations. They learned how easily certainty can be claimed. how quickly narratives form. This awareness sharpened thinking. They asked better questions. They examined sources. They listened more carefully. Skepticism did not erase wonder. It refined it. Belief and skepticism often coexist. One tempers the other. In conversations years later, witnesses rarely argued. They shared perspective. I don't know what it was, but I know it mattered. This sentence captures the balance. Meaning does not require explanation. It requires impact. For some, the experience reinforced belief in unexplored possibilities, not specific theories, just scale. The universe felt larger, more complex, less tidy. For others, the experience reinforced humility, a reminder that perception has limits, that certainty is fragile, that conclusions deserve caution. These outcomes are not contradictory. They are complementary. Both move away from arrogance, one toward curiosity, the other toward restraint. Personal meaning formed quietly. No one built identity around the event. No one reorganized their life. But many carried a small shift, a pause before dismissal, a hesitation before certainty. This shift is difficult to measure, but it endures. Belief systems are rarely changed by single events. They are nudged, adjusted, tilted slightly. The night of the lights served as such a nudge, not a push. People still disagreed. Some leaned toward conventional explanations. Others leaned toward unresolved mystery. But the disagreement remained respectful, because everyone shared one thing: experience. Even those who disagreed on interpretation agreed on observation. Something had been seen. That agreement created grounding. It prevented extremes. Belief without skepticism can drift. Skepticism without openness can harden. This event held both in balance. As you listen, notice the tone remains steady. No persuasion. No invitation to believe. Just acknowledgement. Human meaning is personal. It cannot be assigned. It emerges. Slowly. Often without words. The next section will explore how stories like this persist culturally, not as facts, but as questions passed forward. For now, let this balance settle. Belief did not win. Skepticism did not win. Understanding deepened. And sometimes, that is the most lasting outcome. Some stories end. They reach a conclusion. They resolve. They are archived. Others do not. They linger. Not loudly. Quietly. The story of the lights did not conclude with an answer. It concluded with memory. Memory is different. It does not require resolution to survive. It requires repetition. Stories persist, not because they are proven, but because they are shared. A parent tells a child. A neighbor tells a friend. A witness recalls the night. During a late conversation, each retelling softens edges, not details. Tone. Urgency fades. Reflection remains. This is how stories change. Without becoming fiction, they mature. They become reference points. Remember that night? The phrase does not ask for explanation. It asks for recognition. Cultural memory works this way. Events without closure become touchstones. They are not myths. They are moments. Moments people return to when discussing uncertainty. In time, the story of the lights joined others, not in headlines, in conversations. It became part of a larger pattern of unexplained observations, not as evidence, as context. When similar events occurred elsewhere, people compared notes, not to connect causation, to compare experience. How did it feel? What did people say afterward? This focus on feeling is key. Stories persist because they resonate emotionally, not because they convince. The lights did not scare people. They intrigue them. Intrigue ages well. Fear burns out. Wonder remains. Over time, the story became less about the sky and more about response. How people noticed together. How they spoke quietly. How nothing dramatic followed. This ordinariness made the story believable. Extraordinary claims often collapse. Under scrutiny, ordinary reactions endure. Another factor in persistence is ambiguity. Ambiguity invites interpretation, not resolution. Stories with clear answers close themselves. Stories without answers remain open. Openness invites return. People revisit the story, not to solve it, but to sit with it. This is why unresolved events often outlast resolved ones. They offer space. Cultural storytelling thrives on space, not certainty. In this way, the story of the lights became part of a larger human habit. The habit of noticing, the habit of wondering, the habit of accepting that not everything fits neatly. The story did not become folklore. It did not grow exaggerated wings. It remained modest. That modesty preserved credibility. People who shared it did not claim importance. They simply remembered, and memory, shared carefully, lasts. As you listen, notice how this section feels timeless. This is intentional. Stories that persist do not rush. They drift. They wait for the right moment to be recalled. In the next section, we will explore the role of curiosity, why humans continue to look up, why questions matter, even when answers do not arrive. For now, let the story rest where it belongs, not in proof, not in denial, but in shared human memory. Long after the lights were gone, people still looked at the sky, not because they expected something to return, but because something had changed. The sky no longer felt empty, not full, just open. Human beings have always looked upward, before maps, before science, before language. The sky was the first mystery. It moved when nothing else did. It held light when darkness fell. It promised distance. Looking up is instinctive. Children do it without being told. They point. They ask, "What's that?" The question appears early in life, and it never really disappears. It simply becomes quieter. Curiosity is not a demand for answers. It is an invitation to notice. When people witnessed the lights, that invitation resurfaced. Not urgently, gently. They did not search for meaning immediately. They watched. That act alone mattered. Watching is different from seeking. Seeking wants resolution. Watching accepts presence. The experience reminded many witnesses of something forgotten, that it is possible to observe without explaining. This realization felt restful. In a world full of certainty claims, the unknown felt honest. Looking up became an act of humility. The sky does not respond. It does not explain itself. It simply exists. Curiosity thrives in this silence. People who had witnessed the lights described becoming more attentive afterward. They noticed stars, planes, cloud, movement. They learned patterns, not to dismiss anomalies, but to appreciate regularity. This awareness deepened curiosity. Knowing what is normal makes the unusual visible. Curiosity does not weaken skepticism. It strengthens it. It teaches patience. It delays conclusion. It resists sensationalism. The act of looking up became symbolic, not of belief, of openness. People did not expect to see anything extraordinary again, but they allowed for the possibility. Possibility does not require expectation. It requires space. Curiosity creates that space. It keeps the mind flexible. It prevents certainty from hardening. The lights themselves were less important than the response they triggered. They did not provide answers. They reminded people that questions remain valuable. In conversations years later, witnesses often said they enjoyed not knowing, not because ignorance is comforting, but because wonder is. Wonder is not excitement. It is quiet appreciation, the kind that does not demand proof, only presence. Looking up became a habit again, not daily, but intentionally, during clear nights, during moments of stillness. The sky offered perspective, scale, distance, context. Personal problems felt smaller. Human certainty felt softer. Curiosity did not make people believe more. It made them assume less. This shift is subtle, but profound. The unknown no longer felt threatening. It felt expansive. As you listen, notice how this section slows even further. This is intentional. Curiosity does not rush. It lingers. In the next section, we will approach the closing reflection. Not an answer. A pause. A space for the listener to rest with uncertainty. For now, let the act of looking up remain simple. The sky above, the silence, and the quiet human impulse to wonder. Not every question asks for an answer. Some questions ask for space. The story of the lights never reached a conclusion, and perhaps it was never meant to. There was no final announcement, no discovery, no revelation waiting just out of frame. Instead, there was silence, and silence has its own meaning. In a world that constantly explains, silence feels uncomfortable. We are taught to resolve, to define, to close. But some experiences resist closure. They remain open, not because they are incomplete, but because they exist outside simple explanation. The witnesses eventually returned to their lives. They slept. They worked. They laughed. The night passed into memory, and memory softened its edges. What remained was not confusion. It was acceptance. Acceptance does not mean agreement. It means rest. Rest from forcing meaning. Rest from deciding. The unanswered question no longer demanded attention. It waited quietly, like the sky itself. People learned that not knowing did not diminish the experience. In some ways, it enriched it. Certainty closes doors. Uncertainty leaves them open. The lights did not challenge reality. They expanded it. They reminded people that the world is larger than daily routines. That explanation is not ownership. That wonder does not require belief. Over time, the urge to explain faded, not into apathy, into peace. Peace with ambiguity. Peace with the idea that some moments exist, only to be witnessed. No lessons attached. No demands. Just presence. This presence lingered. Not loudly. Softly. Like background music. The night sky returned to normal. Stars followed their patterns. Planes crossed predictably. Nothing else happened. And that, too, was important. The absence of repetition kept the memory grounded. It did not escalate. It did not grow. It stayed what it was. A moment. As you listen now, you may notice your own breathing, your own stillness. This section is meant to slow you, to remove urgency, to let the mind rest. In not knowing, you do not need to decide what the lights were. You do not need to form belief. You do not need to reject anything. You can simply acknowledge that something happened, and that its meaning remains open. That openness is not weakness. It is honesty. The human mind does not need all answers to feel complete. Sometimes, it only needs permission to stop asking. This story does not end with a solution. It ends with quiet, and quiet, when allowed, becomes rest. In the final section, we will close gently, not with explanation, but with release. For now, sit with the unanswered. Let it exist. Let it breathe. And let yourself drift. Without needing more. Every story eventually learns when to stop speaking. Not because everything has been said, but because nothing more is required. The Night of the Lights does not need a final explanation. It does not need a conclusion to justify its existence. It happened. It was seen. It was remembered. And then it became quiet. Quiet is not absence. Quiet is completion. The sky did not change forever. Stars continued their ancient paths. The moon rose and set. Clouds passed silently. The world returned to its familiar rhythm. Morning followed night. Routine resumed. Nothing extraordinary demanded attention again. And yet, something subtle remained. Not in the sky. In awareness. Those who witnessed the lights did not carry fear. They did not carry belief. They carried perspective. A small shift. A gentle widening. The understanding that the world is not fully known. And that this is not a flaw. It is a feature. Human history is not defined by what we understand. It is defined by what we continue to observe. And observation does not require certainty. It only requires presence. The story you have been listening to was never about objects, never about answers, never about proof. It was about stillness, about how people paused together, looked up together, waited together. It was about how nothing dramatic happened next. No invasion, no revelation, no transformation, just silence. And silence, when shared, becomes grounding. As you rest now, there is nothing left to solve. No threads left hanging. No hidden meaning waiting to be uncovered. The story does not ask to be believed. It does not ask to be dismissed. It asks to be left as it is, complete. Your breathing may feel slower now. Your thoughts less urgent. This is intentional. Stories meant for rest do not stimulate. They release. The sky outside, wherever you are listening from, is likely quiet. Even if clouds cover it, even if light pollution dims it, the sky is still there. It does not demand attention. It waits patiently, just like this story now waits to fade. You do not need to remember details. You do not need to replay scenes. You can allow the narrative to dissolve gently, like light receding into distance. What remains is not mystery. It is calm. Calm that comes from knowing that some experiences do not need resolution. They simply need rest. If your mind drifts, let it drift. If thoughts slow, let them slow. There is nothing else coming. No reveal. No twist. No final word. Only quiet continuation. The night ends the same way it began. Unannounced. Soft. And complete. As you fall asleep, the story releases you. There is nothing left to hold. Nothing left to wonder about. Only stillness. Only rest. Only the gentle understanding that not every light needs to be named. Some are meant only to pass through the sky and leave no trace, except the calm that follows.